Hi everybody, it's Turban King here. I did a video 2 or 3 years ago comparing a Missouri Wind and Solar to a Thermodyne, and I thought it would be appropriate that we do a new video comparing it to the latest generation of Missouri Wind and Solar versus the latest generation of the Thermodyne PMAs. And I'm going to start with the Freedom because this is the one that all the hype is about and all the propaganda is about. I want to point out some of the details of this. First of all, he's gotten rid of the cogging. Now what I'm going to do is, I have this older unit from several years ago, and here it is. If you can see the inside, there's no tricks here. I'm going to take the wrench and I'm going to spin the old one. You can probably hear it. That's cogging. And there's a lot of magnetism in the shaft. Now I'm going to take this one and there's still some cogging in there, but you can at least now turn it with your hand. With this one, I gotta move these back. I'm a little limited on space because it's cold outside. I can't even turn this. This spacer turns. And the nut is fairly tight. And I can't turn it with the nut either. So, this was rated at 1600 watts. It's a Delco PMA enclosure, which Missouri Wind and Solar has gone to a lot of trouble of downplaying now, even though he sold these things when he started in 2008. The story, I'll tell you the story about this. Originally, Thermodyne was supplying Missouri Wind and Solar with PMAs, blades, and so on, and Missouri Wind and Solar was a dealer. I'm not sure of all the details, but somewhere along the line, Sunborn, who was maybe a 45-minute drive from Missouri Wind and Solar, started making their own and with the same design. Somebody copied somebody. That's okay. Sunborn got a patent on their design, and Missouri Wind and Solar stopped buying from Thermodyne and started buying from Sunborn. Well, he went out and he duplicated the Sunborn, and Sunborn made a stink about it, so he sued them, even though he violated the patent. Well, what you see is pretty much the generation. This is a, I'm not sure, this might be a hybrid of the Sunborn, but I mean it's been sitting around. It hasn't been installed. It's never been installed. I used this in a video years ago, and you can see rust popping out. It's been sitting out here in this heated garage for all these years, but it's nothing more than a Delco housing with some magic done inside. It is not an car alternator, as people are saying. It is using nothing more than the car alternator ends. The rest inside is completely different. Alright, let's go back to the Freedom. Missouri Wind and Solar was advertising this as being USA made. And thanks to a bunch of advocates, they finally got the information to prove that this was actually made in Vietnam. And he's made it sound like it's so un-American to buy anything from Vietnam or China, but yet 80 or 90% of his product offering is just that. It's offshore. Now, this enclosure, he chose to make use a different enclosure. This is what appears to be a appliance motor housing, washing machine, dryer, who knows, but that's what it appears to be. And there's a lot of similar designs on the internet that you can find. Now, he got rid of the cogging, and as I say, I'll give him this. You can turn it by hand now. You don't have as much cogging, but it's still there. He achieved that by putting too much space between his field and his magnets. It still does not produce any power. The old one, I had 4 of them. None of them produced any more than, I can't say any more than 150 watts in 30-mile-per-hour winds. And boy, we had some winds around here. This guy here, there's complaints all over the place about the output, and the output apparently is no better. I don't have any first-hand experience at that, but there's more than one person that has complained about it, and it's been attempted to censor all that information. Another thing I discovered about this housing is that you can see a gap here. I can put my fingernail right into it. I'm sinking my nail all the way down to the cuticle. But as you turn it around, the gap gets narrower and narrower, and there's no gap on this side. Well, if this were on crooked, this wouldn't turn. So something tells me that these housings are, they're just not the quality they should be. On the back side, he's using a number 12. It looks like a number 12. There's no marking on it. Wire with this 3-prong plug. This 3-prong plug is a good idea. The only problem with it is this type of plug is prone to failure. And there are several videos out there, people showing these plugs failing. The second thing is the wire is just, well, you can see it. It's just coming out of the case. They got it wrapped with tape to prevent it from chafing, and it's just flopping around. If anybody's ever watched their PMAs in gusty winds, they're whipping around like this. Well, you can just imagine you're whipping it around like this. There's nothing holding that wire. Eventually, it's going to break off the field inside where it's connected. Another thing that's here is there's no bearing cap on it. There's no way of keeping the water and the contaminants out of the bearing. That stuff's going to work its way into that bearing and chew it up. I'm also told, and I believe this one's never been installed, I'm also told that these shafts rust. Now, another thing that he's telling his people, which I just became aware of, is that he's telling everybody not to tighten the lock nut. There's a lock washer on here. You're not supposed to tighten that. Well, somebody did tighten it, and he found out why you're not supposed to tighten it. These shafts are too small, or too soft, I'm sorry. The shaft is too soft. So he's chewing up the threads by trying to put the lock washer on there. You got to have the lock washer on there to prevent the hub from spinning on the shaft. Because as soon as you start putting loads on these things, they get harder to turn. Well, I don't know what the theory is, but see, now I've got it shorted out and I can't turn it. So you can just imagine how much effort has to be put behind the blades. The blade will spin, it'll chew up the hub, it'll chew up the shaft, end of story. There's a few people out there that are just blowing a gasket about that. People are just so thrilled to see it spinning around, but they're not checking to see if they're actually making any power. And that's kind of a shame, because you're spending $400 plus whatever it costs you to do the installation of it. It should be making you electricity, and people are very disappointed. So, now that we've looked at the latest generation of the Freedom, let's talk about the latest generation of the Thermodyne Ultra Core. Alright, here we have it. There's no, whoop, don't want them wires touching yet. There's no cogging in there. I'll put the wrench on it to exasperate the noise for you. My American-made wrench here. And I'm trying to make noise and I'm not. I'll even short out these fields for you. No cogging. Again, it's a Delco enclosure. On the back side, there's a bearing cover. This is number 8 wire, and it's, well, if I didn't have paint on it, you could probably read it on the wire. It's labeled. It's a number 8 wire coming out of it, stranded, tin-plated copper, and it has a bearing cap on it. And it has a stainless steel strap which is directly fastened to the PMA to prevent the wires from being tugged on. And they're in there pretty tight. You can't move them. Now, the magnets inside, well, I can't put a feeler gauge in there because of the magnets, but eyeballing it, it looks like it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 8 to 10 thousandths clearance between the field and the magnets. Now, let's talk about dimensional. Missouri Wind and Solar has been talking about how great their PMA is, or their PMG, or whatever this thing is, and they make it look like it's a huge unit. They make it look like it is just absolutely huge. Well, I'm going to pair the bolt eye to the bolt eye, which is not a good comparison. It's still bigger. The Ultra Core, the Thermodyne Ultra Core, which is about the same price, is still bigger than the Freedom. And here's your housing to housing. His old Delco design was actually bigger. Granted, this is a 3-phase unit, and this has the rectifier built into it. Well, I said it before, and I'll say it again. I don't know where you want to spend your money and how you want to spend your money, but you need to think about this, because which would you rather have? Would you rather have one that's producing? Would you rather have one that's not going, that's designed not to fail in a year? Somebody's banking on these things failing in a year so that you can sell them. He can sell you another one, or give you a hard time, which he's known for. These are 99% U.S. made. Well, maybe 98. Right now, the only thing that is made out of the country on these are the magnets. Everything else is now made in the United States. The history was parts of it was being made in Canada. Mexico. But he has stopped doing that. He's making everything in the United States. He's made them so that they're really pretty foolproof. He's beefed up the bearings, so it's got a heavier bearing inside there. So he's got different bearing caps inside, which are not done here. He's using the same core as he used here, and these two, we're not. This has the slant core in it, and you can see it. I'm going to short these out again with my fat little fingers, and I can still turn it, and there's no cogging. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your money. You put it where you want, but I'm asking you to look at more than just those blades spinning around. Why don't you look and see how much it's putting out? Thank you, and enjoy.